The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of Sophia's bedroom, casting a warm glow on the meticulously arranged space. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the coffee machine downstairs. Sophia stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the street below. From the outside, her life looked perfect. A charming home, a stable marriage, and a career that demanded just enough to make her feel accomplished without overwhelming her. Yet, standing there in her silk robe, she couldn't shake the gnawing emptiness that had taken residence inside her. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "Sophia, did you see where I left my keys?" "In the bowl by the door," she replied without turning. Ethan entered the room, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. His presence was steady, predictable, even comforting, but also unremarkable. "You have your meeting today, right?" he asked, brushing a quick kiss on her cheek. "Yes," she murmured, offering a practiced smile. He hesitated for a moment, as though searching for something unsaid. Then, with a nod, he grabbed his keys and left for work. The front door clicked shut, and Sophia exhaled. The silence felt heavier now, her thoughts filling the void he left behind. Later that day, Sophia found herself at an art gallery downtown, invited by a client who valued networking in creative spaces. She wasn't particularly interested in the paintings, but there was something about the atmosphere, quiet, contemplative, that appealed to her. Wandering between exhibits, she paused in front of a striking piece, a swirling storm of colors that seemed chaotic yet deliberate. "Powerful, isn't it?" a voice said beside her. Startled, she turned to find a man standing there, his hands in his pockets. He had an easy confidence about him, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in more than just the artwork. "It is," she replied, her voice steady but curious. "I always wonder about the artist's state of mind when they create something like this," he continued, his gaze shifting to her. "What do you think they were feeling?" Sophia considered the question, caught off guard by its intimacy. "Conflicted," she said finally. "Like they were trying to make sense of something overwhelming." He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "A good interpretation. I'm Daniel, by the way." "Sophia." They shook hands, his grip firm but warm. Their conversation continued, moving effortlessly from art to philosophy, each exchange peeling back another layer of who they were. Sophia couldn't remember the last time she felt so seen, so engaged. As the gallery began to empty, Daniel glanced at his watch. "I'd love to continue this conversation sometime," he said. "Here's my card if you're interested." Sophia hesitated, then took the card. "Thank you," she said, slipping it into her bag. Walking home that evening, the city lights blurred in her vision as her thoughts raced. Daniel was nothing like Ethan, spontaneous, intriguing, and somehow familiar despite being a stranger. She felt a flicker of guilt for even thinking about him, but the spark he ignited within her was undeniable. When she arrived home, Ethan was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The aroma of garlic and herbs filled the air, but the sight of him chopping vegetables felt strangely distant. "You're late," he said, glancing up. "Sorry," Sophia replied, placing her bag on the counter. "The gallery ran longer than I expected." "Did you have fun?" he asked, his tone neutral. "It was nice," she said, avoiding his gaze. "Different." Ethan nodded, returning his focus to the cutting board. They ate in near silence, the occasional clink of cutlery the only sound between them. Sophia wanted to tell him about the painting, about Daniel, about the way her thoughts had spiraled, but she couldn't find the words. Later, as they lay in bed, Ethan fell asleep quickly, his steady breaths filling the room. Sophia stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying the day's events. For years, she had convinced herself that stability and love were synonymous, but now she wasn't so sure. Something within her had shifted, a small crack forming in the foundation of her carefully constructed life. She reached for her bag and pulled out Daniel's card, tracing the embossed letters with her fingers. A part of her knew she should throw it away, but another part, the part she hadn't listened to in years, whispered to hold on to it. The card disappeared back into her bag as she turned off the light. In the darkness, the crack widened, but it was still small enough to ignore, at least for now. The cafe buzzed with muted conversations and the soft clatter of ceramic mugs. Sophia sat at a corner table, her fingers tracing the rim of her cappuccino. She told herself she had come here for a change of scenery, a chance to escape the quiet monotony of her home. But the card in her purse told another story. She had spent the last 2 days debating whether to call Daniel. Each time her hand hovered over the phone, guilt pulled her back. Ethan had been attentive recently, asking about her day and offering small gestures of affection. Yet those moments felt forced, as though they were part of an unspoken routine. Sophia's thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. "Is this seat taken?" Her heart skipped. She looked up to find Daniel standing before her, his confident smile framed by the golden light of the afternoon sun. He wore a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, a look that was casual yet undeniably polished. "No, please," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. He sat, setting a black notebook on the table. "Fancy meeting you here," he said, his tone playful. Sophia smiled nervously. "I didn't expect to see you again." "Neither did I," he admitted, "but something told me I'd run into you." Their conversation began easily, flowing from one topic to another. Daniel spoke with a passion that fascinated her, his words painting vivid pictures of his travels and creative endeavors. He asked her questions that went beyond the surface, probing into her aspirations and dreams. "What made you stop painting?" he asked, catching her off guard. Sophia blinked, surprised he remembered. "Life, I guess. Work, marriage. It just fell to the side." "That's a shame," he said, leaning forward. "You talked about it with such fire the other day. I can't imagine giving up something like that." His words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they echoed a truth she had avoided for years. She shrugged, offering a half-smile. "It's not as simple as just picking up a brush." "Why not?" he asked. "What's stopping you?" Sophia didn't answer. Instead, she sipped her coffee, hoping to swallow the lump forming in her throat. Daniel didn't press her, allowing the silence to settle between them. After a while, he reached for his notebook and flipped to a blank page. "Here," he said, sliding it across the table along with a pen. "Draw something." Sophia laughed softly. "I haven't drawn in years." "All the more reason to start now," he said, his smile encouraging. Hesitant, she picked up the pen and let her hand move across the page. At first, her lines were tentative, but soon they became bolder, forming the outline of a tree. When she finished, she looked up to find Daniel watching her with quiet admiration. "You still have it," he said. Sophia felt a strange warmth at his words, a validation she hadn't realized she craved. She handed the notebook back, her cheeks flushing. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Their meeting ended soon after, Daniel leaving with a casual wave. As Sophia walked home, she replayed their conversation in her mind, each word resonating like a chord struck in a forgotten melody. For the first time in years she felt alive, not just existing but truly living. That evening, Ethan noticed the change in her. "You seem happy today," he remarked as they ate dinner. Sophia smiled faintly, avoiding his gaze. "Just had a good day, I guess." He nodded, but the tension in his brow lingered. Ethan wasn't a man prone to suspicion, but he had a knack for sensing when something was off. Later that night, as Ethan read in bed, Sophia sat in her study, staring at the drawing she had ripped from Daniel's notebook. The tree stood firm and unyielding, its branches reaching for something unseen. Her phone buzzed, breaking her reverie. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from an unknown number. "Daniel, thank you for today. You reminded me why I love moments like this." Her heart raced as she stared at the words. 1,000 thoughts collided in her mind, each one urging her in a different direction. She wanted to respond, but the weight of guilt held her back. Instead, she placed the phone face down on the desk and leaned back in her chair. The crack in her carefully constructed life had widened, and she knew it wouldn't be easy to repair. Yet part of her wasn't sure she wanted to. As the night stretched on, Sophia remained in her study, the tree on the page and Daniel's words etched into her thoughts. The line between right and wrong blurred, and for the first time, she found herself willing to step into the gray. Sophia woke up with the weight of yesterday pressing down on her chest. The light that streamed into the bedroom felt different today, harsher, as if the sun itself were judging her. She glanced at Ethan, still asleep beside her. His face relaxed in peaceful oblivion. It was as if the world had continued on without noticing the small rupture she'd created. She pushed the tangled sheets off her legs and stood, making her way to the bathroom. As the cold water splashed against her face, she stared at her reflection in the mirror, searching for the woman she used to be, the one who believed in love as a simple, unshakable bond. But that woman seemed distant now, replaced by someone she didn't fully understand. The text from Daniel still lingered in her phone, a subtle reminder of the connection she had made, the spark that had been ignited within her. "You reminded me why I love moments like this." His words echoed in her mind, but instead of filling her with excitement, they filled her with dread. She dried her face, then stared at her phone. One message, one moment of choice. She had told herself she wouldn't respond, that it was harmless, just a fleeting connection. But now, after all the time she'd spent avoiding her own desires, it felt like something deeper. After a long moment, Sophia typed a brief reply. "I'm glad we met." She sent it before she could second-guess herself. The text was simple, yet it felt like a confession. Downstairs, Ethan was making breakfast. A ritual he'd adopted after work started slowing down. The smell of sizzling bacon filled the air, familiar and comforting. But today it felt suffocating. "Morning," he said, turning with a smile. "How'd you sleep?" "Fine," Sophia answered too quickly. Her eyes dropped to the plate he was preparing. "Looks good." Ethan set the plate down in front of her, his brow furrowing slightly. "You sure everything's okay?" Sophia paused. He was trying, but she could tell he didn't fully understand. His love for her was steady, unchanging, but somewhere along the way, it had become muted, like a song played in the background. She felt herself slipping further from it. "I'm just tired," she said, forcing a smile. "A lot on my mind." Ethan nodded, but there was an unspoken question in his eyes, one that Sophia wasn't ready to answer. As she sat there, poking at her food, the phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, her stomach tightening. "Daniel." She picked it up cautiously. "Meet me tomorrow. I know a quiet park near the lake." Sophia's pulse quickened. She had not intended for it to get this far. Daniel's presence was no longer just a curiosity. It had become a pull, one that she was unwilling to resist. But she knew she couldn't go. She couldn't. Still, her fingers hovered over the screen, her mind warring between guilt and desire. After a moment she typed, "I can't." The reply came swiftly. "It's okay. I'll be here if you change your mind." Sophia placed the phone face down on the table. Her heart raced, but it wasn't out of excitement. It was the unsettling realization that she had crossed a line. She couldn't return to the safety of ignorance. Later that day, as she went about her errands, she found herself thinking less of the mundane tasks she was completing and more about the choice she had made. She felt like she was standing at the edge of a precipice, looking down into an abyss that had once seemed so far away. "Home," Lila called. Her voice was cheerful as always. "How's everything going? Still keeping that picture-perfect life up?" Sophia's laughter came out forced. "I guess so." Lila's tone shifted. "You don't sound too sure." Sophia hesitated. She hadn't shared anything with Lila yet, but she felt a weight building inside her, pressing her to speak. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" Lila's voice sharpened. "You and Ethan. Or something else?" Sophia closed her eyes, her pulse quickening. Lila's directness was exactly what she needed, but feared. "Something else," she admitted. "I've met someone." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "What do you mean, someone?" Lila finally asked, her voice low. Sophia swallowed. A man I met at the gallery. He makes me feel alive. He makes me feel something that I haven't felt in a long time. Lila exhaled slowly, then said, "Are you serious about this, Soph? Because you know what's at stake, right? Ethan. Your marriage." Sophia closed her eyes again, the room spinning around her. "I don't know. I don't know what I want anymore." Lila sighed. "Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. But you need to be honest with yourself. If you're unhappy, you need to figure out why, and you need to make a choice. This isn't just about a guy. It's about you and what you really need." The weight of Lila's words settled over her like a blanket, cold and heavy. She hung up the phone, the silence in the house pressing in on her once more. Sophia knew she couldn't go back. But the path forward. It was unclear, and each step felt more uncertain than the last. Yet the question remained. Would she continue to chase the forbidden, or would she confront the reality of her marriage, before it was too late?